The moment my stepmother stood to announce she was cutting me from the will, the lawyer just smiled, then clicked on a file labeled, "If Veronica Speaks First." He left me a weapon she never knew existed, a clause, a password, and an appointment where the dead still keep perfect time. Tonight, my father's honor, our family fortune, and her freedom would be decided in a dark wood-paneled room where every word leaves legal fingerprints. My name is Nora Bennett, and I've spent the last 15 years watching my stepmother erase me from my father's life, one calculated move at a time. Now, sitting in attorney Daniel Whitaker's conference room, I watched her attempt the final eraser. The recording device on the mahogany table blinked red in steady intervals, capturing every word as Veronica Voss rose from her leather chair. At 52, she still commanded attention. Silver blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon, Hermes scarf draped precisely over her charcoal suit. Behind her, arranged like a human barricade, sat her sister Margaret and two cousins I'd met exactly twice in 15 years. Before we proceed with the reading, Veronica announced, her voice carrying that practiced blend of grief and authority, "I have a document that supersedes whatever version Daniel has prepared." The wall clock ticked, 3:47 p.m., 3 days since we'd buried Graham Bennett. My father in Redwood Heights Cemetery, 3 days since I'd stood at his graveside, wondering if the distance between us these past years had been my fault or something more deliberate. She produced a manila envelope extracting papers with theatrical precision, a cautil to Graham's will, properly witnessed and notarized. He signed it 6 weeks ago. I felt the familiar numbness creeping up my spine, the same sensation that had protected me through the funeral, through the condolences of business associates who seemed surprised to learn Graham Bennett even had a daughter. "The codicil is quite clear now," Veronica continued, addressing the room as if conducting a board meeting at Harborline Dynamics, where I'd climbed ahead of brand operations without ever mentioning whose daughter I was. Given Nora's extended absence from Graham's life, her lack of involvement in his care during his illness, and her failure to maintain meaningful contact, Graham chose to redirect her portion of the estate. Extended absence, lack of involvement, the words hung in the climate-controlled air like accusations. I wanted to tell her about the 73 unreturned calls, the birthday cards that mysteriously never reached him, the Thanksgiving dinners where my invitation somehow got lost, the hospital visits where I was told he was sleeping, only to learn later he'd been asking for me. But I remained silent, studying Daniel Whitaker's expression. The 60-year-old attorney sat with his fingers steepled, gray eyes revealing nothing behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd been my father's lawyer for 30 years, had drafted the incorporation papers for Bennett Development Group, had been at my mother's funeral when I was sent. I spent 15 years watching Veronica work her slow, calculated magic. It wasn't just about getting my father's attention. No, she knew how to twist the emotional dynamics, how to manipulate, how to make him and everyone else believe that I was the problem. It started subtly, like a whisper that you can't quite hear, but it grows louder and louder over time until it drowns everything else out. My father's gradual disappearance from my life wasn't just a result of his career or age. It was because of her. Veronica had this way of making everything look like it was for his good, and in the process, she built a wall between us brick by brick. She always had this cold, composed exterior, a mask she wore so well that it was hard to know when she was being genuine or when she was orchestrating another part of her plan. Veronica didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to pull strings directly. No, she had a more subtle method. She understood the power at distance. First, it was little things. My father would say things like, "I'm very busy with the Singapore project," or, "Veronica's got it covered for today. Maybe we can talk tomorrow." Tomorrow turned into next week, and next week into never. It wasn't like he shut me out entirely. No, she was too smart for that. She made sure to leave just enough room for hope, just enough to make me feel guilty when I couldn't reach him, and just enough to make me question myself when I noticed that every attempt I made to reconnect seemed to fall flat. Every holiday, every birthday, every milestone, somehow there was always an excuse. Sometimes it was a last-minute meeting or a dinner that was rescheduled. I could tell you about all the times I showed up at our family home, hoping to have dinner with my dad, only to be told he wasn't available, or even worse, when I drove there unannounced and found them hosting a party, Veronica's friends, her business contacts, her family, my father laughing and joking with people I didn't know. He seemed at ease, almost carefree, and I felt like an outsider in my own home. I tried to push through, tried to break the walls she was building around him, but the more I pushed, the more she cemented the space between us. I was just the inconvenient reminder of the first marriage, the one that ended in loss and pain. Veronica, she came in with her perfect smile and her effortless charm, and slowly, she started replacing the pieces of our life that reminded my father of the past. First, it was my mother's photographs. I remember standing in the hallway, and one by one, they disappeared. It wasn't like anyone told me. I just noticed that one day, the pictures were gone, replaced with abstract art that Veronica favored. Even the furniture started changing. The piano my mother had played was moved to the basement and eventually sold. At the time, I didn't know what to make of it. I didn't fully understand that she was erasing my mother from our home, from his memory. But now, looking back, I see it for what it was. Veronica wasn't just moving things around. She was taking ownership of our family, of our past, of everything that had once belonged to me. It was a strategy to make me disappear in the most subtle way possible. She didn't need to do anything obvious, anything that would make me notice right away. It was all about slowly pushing me out, making sure I wasn't needed, wasn't wanted. It's not like she ever directly told my father to cut me off. No, she knew that would never work. She made it happen by creating a wall of excuses, a wall of distance that left me wondering if I was the problem all along. One of the most painful memories I have is of when I graduated from Northwestern. I had worked so hard, and all I wanted was for my father to see me, to be proud of me. But when the card arrived, it wasn't even from him. It was from Veronica, and it wasn't personal. It was store-bought, with her handwriting inside, congratulating me in the most distant, impersonal way. And then there was the phone call. It was the summer before my senior year, and I decided I wasn't going to let the distance between us grow any wider. I drove home, unannounced, hoping to just spend some time with him, to reconnect. But when I showed up, I found my room had been turned into a guest suite, a neutral-colored bedspread, no personal touches, no trace of the girl who had once lived there. They'd put me in the pool house, and when I questioned it, Veronica explained that all the bedrooms were occupied. She said it so sweetly, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I couldn't help but feel that I was being pushed further away, like I didn't belong there anymore. That night, I overheard Veronica talking with Margaret, her sister, in the kitchen. They were discussing me like I wasn't even there. She shows up when it's convenient for her, expecting everything to revolve around her schedule. Veronica said, "Graham's finally building the life he deserves." I wasn't part of that life. I was a nuisance, an inconvenient reminder of the past. The worst part wasn't that she was saying these things, it was that I believed her. For years, I thought I was the one who was wrong. Maybe I wasn't trying hard enough. Maybe I was selfish. Maybe I had abandoned him and I just couldn't see it. Maybe I was the one who needed to change. But the truth was, She had made it so hard for me to reach him. She controlled everything: his schedule, his visitors, his phone calls, even his care. When I tried to visit him in the hospital, I was told he was sleeping, that I should come back another time. The hospital staff, they were all part of her plan. She'd isolated him, isolated me, and I didn't know what to do. And when I finally did see him, it was always rushed, always under her watchful eye. But what struck me most was the way my father had changed. He wasn't the man I remembered. He had become the shadow of himself, a man who was so disconnected from everything he once loved, everything that once mattered to him. There was one time, though, when everything shifted. It was his 65th birthday, and I had found out about the surprise party Veronica had planned at the country club. I wasn't on the guest list, but I showed up anyway, hoping to catch a glimpse of the man I once knew. When I walked in, I saw my father standing there, laughing with people I didn't know. He looked genuinely happy, something I hadn't seen in years. But when he saw me, his face changed. He looked surprised, then concerned, like he didn't know what to do with me. He hugged me that night, a little too tight, like he was trying to hold on to something, like he was trying to hold on to me. And just as quickly, Veronica appeared, pulling him away, guiding him back to the guests, making sure the narrative stayed in her favor. It wasn't until later that I learned just how deep her control had gone. When I tried to speak with my father about his health, about his illness, Veronica would put up barriers. She would tell me that he needed rest, that he wasn't in any condition to talk. She made sure that every aspect of his life was filtered through her, that I couldn't even reach him without her permission. And the more she did this, the more I doubted myself. I questioned my motives. I wondered if I was just being selfish, if I had misunderstood everything. It was like she had this ability to make me feel like I was the one in the wrong, even though I was the one trying to break through her walls. I started to realize that everything was deliberate. The missed calls, the canceled visits, the strange excuses, it was all part of the bigger picture. She was trying to erase me from his life, to make him believe that I didn't care, that I was negligent, that I was the daughter who had abandoned him. And the more she succeeded, the more isolated I became. But at the same time, I was starting to wake up. I began to see the patterns, to understand that this wasn't just about my father's health or his career. This was about control. This was about Veronica using my father's illness as a way to secure her own future and to get rid of me in the process. She didn't just take control of him, she took control of everything. She isolated him from the people who could have helped him, who could have seen through her manipulation. And she isolated me from him too, but what she didn't realize was that while she was building her walls, while she was controlling every aspect of his life, my father was planning, he was strategizing. He had known for a long time that she was dangerous, that her control over him was toxic, and that eventually it would destroy our family. But he also knew that to fight her openly would mean war. He couldn't protect me from the fallout. So he played the long game. And that's when the envelope arrived. 2 years ago, my father handed me that envelope, pressing it into my hands with a warning, "Give this to Tom Hale. Tell him to hold it for you until the time comes." I didn't understand it then, but now everything was falling into place. My father had been preparing for this moment long before I ever realized it. Veronica had spent 15 years trying to erase me from his life, but my father had been building a fortress around me, piece by piece, to ensure that she couldn't win. And now, as I sat in that conference room, watching her try to pull her final move, I understood. It wasn't over. It wasn't over at all. Veronica rose from her seat, her sharp heels clicking against the polished wood floor as she walked to the front of the room. She moved with such grace, such control, as if she knew the power she wielded in this moment. Her face a mask of composed grief, was the perfect display of practiced performance. It was as if she was acting in a play, playing the role of the grieving widow who is forced to take this tragic step. But I knew better. This wasn't about grief. It was about power. She paused, glancing around the room at the assembled faces, Margaret, her ever-supportive sister, who sat with a tight-lipped smile, and her cousins, who had always been peripheral figures in my life. They, too, had been swept up in her web. Veronica's eyes flicked to Daniel Whitaker, the family lawyer, and then to me. It was almost as if she was enjoying the anticipation, drawing it out for effect. My heart raced, but I kept my expression neutral. The walls I had built around myself so carefully starting to feel a little thinner in the face of her game. Before we proceed, Veronica said, her voice smooth, deliberate, I have a document that supersedes whatever version Daniel has prepared. Her words echoed in the room, and I could feel the weight of them pressing down on me. It was as if the ground beneath me shifted slightly, the delicate balance of control and power swinging dangerously in her favor. I tried to keep my hands steady, but my fingers were tense, tightly gripping the armrests of my chair as she slid a manila envelope across the table toward Daniel. She made a show of pulling the papers out slowly, almost ceremoniously, as if she were unveiling a masterpiece. I couldn't help but notice the way she handled the documents, her fingers lingering over them, like she was savoring the moment, relishing the control she had over my future. The words on the papers were nothing more than a weapon in her hands, ready to strip me of everything I had. Graham's will, and she began, was revised 6 weeks ago. It's clear, it's thorough, and it reflects his wishes in light of recent events. She didn't even glance at me as she spoke, her gaze fixed firmly on Daniel, as if I were no more than an inconvenient bystander in this whole charade. Given Nora's extended absence from Graham's life, Veronica continued, her lack of involvement in his care during his illness, and her failure to maintain meaningful contact. Graham chose to redirect her portion of the estate. Her words landed like punches, each one a calculated strike meant to wound. Extended absence, lack of involvement, failure to maintain meaningful contact. I could hear the venom in her voice, the accusation that hung in the air like a smog. I wanted to protest. I wanted to scream that she had made it impossible for me to be involved, that she had put up walls around my father that I couldn't break through. But I remained silent, my throat dry, my heart pounding in my chest as she continued. You see, Daniel, Veronica went on, Graham's assets will be allocated according to his revised will, which reflects the true nature of the family dynamic. Those who showed genuine care and presence will receive the estate's benefits. She slid the papers across the table toward Daniel, her fingers brushing against the manila envelope with a flourish, as if her words had some undeniable truth to them. I could see Daniel's brow furrow slightly as he took the papers from her. He adjusted his glasses, but there was no sign of emotion in his face. He was the consummate professional, the one who had witnessed countless family disputes, the one who had been my father's confidant for years. But despite his calm demeanor, I saw the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth, the imperceptible hesitation that made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't entirely alone in this room. The silence that followed Veronica's statement was thick, suffocating. The ticking of the wall clock, the only sound in the room, seemed impossibly loud in the stillness. I could feel my pulse in my ears as Daniel scanned the documents. It felt like an eternity before he spoke. Interesting, he murmured, his voice steady but tinged with a note of curiosity that caught my attention. A word that could mean anything or nothing. His gray eyes flicked up to meet Veronica's, then shifted to me, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his gaze, a glimmer of something that told me this wasn't over. Veronica's cousins shifted in their seats, their eyes darting between her and Daniel, their discomfort palpable. Margaret's hand moved to rest on Veronica's shoulder, a gesture of support that looked more rehearsed than sincere. It was almost as if the entire room were waiting for some cue to move. The tension was thick, the stakes rising with each passing second. Veronica's triumphant smirk was fading slightly, the cracks in her composed mask starting to show. Daniel remained silent as he skimmed through the papers, his face betraying nothing. I tried to steady my breath, my mind racing as I looked between Veronica and him, trying to read the situation. Something was happening here. I could feel it, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Then Daniel set the papers aside and opened his leather portfolio. "Well then," he said, his fingers hovering over his laptop keyboard. "This certainly changes things." And that was it. That was the moment I realized that this wasn't just a reading of a will. This was a battle, a game of power and strategy, where every move mattered, every word had weight, and the stakes were higher than I had ever imagined. I watched as Daniel smiled a small, almost imperceptible upturn of his lips, one that Veronica failed to notice as she basked in her perceived victory. It was a knowing smile, one that told me everything I needed to know. And in that moment, I understood why my father had trusted Daniel, why he had chosen him to be his lawyer for so many years. It wasn't just about legal expertise, it was about understanding. It was about playing the long game. The conference room was still. The only sound, the rhythmic ticking of the clock and the soft rustle of paper as Daniel pulled something from his folder. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing on me, the uncertainty in the air. I watched Veronica's face, trying to decipher her next move, but she was too busy basking in her victory to see the trap being set. "I believe," Daniel said, "that Graham executed a new will on January 10th. Properly witnessed and recorded, this will is properly filed with the court." He paused, allowing the words to sink in. Veronica's eyes narrowed slightly, but her facade remained intact. It was clear she didn't fully understand what Daniel was saying. She had assumed she had already won, that the game was over, but Daniel wasn't finished. "In addition to that," he continued, "Graham executed a pour-over will that supersedes all previous versions. It has been filed as part of the Bennett Legacy Trust, with Nora as the primary beneficiary." He slid a new set of papers toward her. Veronica's face tightened, and for the first time, I saw something that resembled fear flicker across her expression. Veronica opened her mouth to speak, but Daniel was already ahead of her. "And that," he said calmly, "is where this becomes complicated. You see, Nora's inheritance, her share of the estate, is already secured in the trust. The assets you've just presented are irrelevant." Veronica's eyes darted to the papers, then back to Daniel, as if she was trying to process what was happening. But it was too late. The damage had been done. Her final move had backfired, and she had walked right into the trap my father had set for her. I sat back, trying to hold myself together as the full scope of my father's plan started to unfold before me. Every step of the way. He had been preparing for this moment. Every move, every word, every document he had left behind was a step in a master plan to protect me, to make sure that Veronica could never take away everything he had built. Daniel's voice was steady as he continued. "As for the will you just presented," he said, "I'm afraid it contains a number of discrepancies." He paused, glancing down at his laptop. "For example, the signature date on this will indicates Graham signed it on March 15th. However, hospital records show that he was under general anesthesia that day for a procedure." Veronica stiffened, her face flushing as Daniel's words sank in. She tried to regain her composure, but it was clear she was starting to crack. "There must be some mistake," she muttered, her voice no longer as confident as it had been before. But Daniel wasn't finished. Additionally, he said, the notary seal on this document is from a notary public whose commission expired 2 months before this document was allegedly notarized. A silence fell over the room. Veronica's gaze flicked nervously from Daniel to the papers, trying to find some explanation, some excuse. But there was no escape. She had been caught in her own lies. But that's not all, Daniel said, his voice now almost sympathetic, though there was no mistaking the triumph in his tone. He pulled out another document, one that seemed to confirm the growing unease in Veronica's face. This will, the one you presented, also references a property at 42 Riverside Drive. However, that property was sold by Graham in 2019. He looked directly at Veronica. It seems rather odd to bequeath something he no longer owns. I could see Veronica's world start to crumble. Her perfectly constructed facade, the one she had so carefully built, was beginning to crack. I could almost hear the sound of her plan falling apart. Daniel's voice was calm, but firm. And then there's the paper itself. The watermark on this paper comes from a batch manufactured in April, after Graham's death. The room was still, the tension palpable. Veronica's hand was trembling slightly as she gripped the papers, her confidence slipping away. Daniel sat back, letting the weight of his words settle. I think we've covered the most important points, Daniel said finally. Now, let's move on to the next item. Graham had a contingency plan in place for just such an event. He opened a folder and placed a small, unassuming USB drive on the table. This contains evidence that, should anyone contest the trust, it will be made public. I'm sure you can imagine what that would mean for you. Veronica looked at the USB drive, her expression shifting between fear and disbelief. The truth had been laid bare, and she had nowhere left to hide. Daniel leaned forward, his voice quiet but firm. You've lost, Veronica. It's over. And just like that, the tide had turned, the power dynamics had shifted, and for the first time, I felt like I was in control. My father had known all along that this would happen. He had prepared for it, planned for it, and now the time had come to bring everything into the light. Veronica had played her final card, but it was no match for the strategy my father had devised. The game was over, and I had won. As the tension in the room continued to rise, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, something more important than the documents Veronica had just presented. I looked at Daniel Whitaker, trying to read his expression, but it remained as composed as ever. He had been the one constant throughout my life when it came to family matters, my father's lawyer, confidant, and friend. But now, I could see something else in his eyes, a flicker of something deeper, something that suggested that this was all part of a bigger plan, one that I hadn't fully understood until now. Daniel remained silent for a moment as Veronica shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her smug expression, the one that had accompanied her earlier presentation of the will, was beginning to fade. She had expected her move to be the final one, the one that would cut me out entirely and leave her with everything, but it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. You're wrong, Veronica, Daniel said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen enough of these types of battles to know when the game had changed. This will that you've presented is invalid. Veronica's face froze, her eyes narrowing as she leaned forward. What do you mean? She demanded, her tone sharp, no longer the calm, authoritative voice she had used earlier. Her composure was slipping fast. I could see her mind working, trying to find some explanation, some way to salvage the situation. But Daniel wasn't finished. What you don't realize, Daniel continued, is that Graham executed a new will, one that was filed on January 10th, 2025. A will that supersedes anything you've just presented. My heart skipped a beat. The truth was starting to emerge, and with it, The realization that my father had prepared for this moment all along. He had known exactly what Veronica would do. He had known how far she would go to secure his estate for herself, and he had made sure that I would never be left unprotected. The weight of his foresight was beginning to sink in. All these years of isolation, all the missed opportunities, had led to this point. But now, it was time for everything to come to light. "What do you mean, supersedes?" Veronica asked, her voice tight with disbelief. "I'm holding Graham's will right here. This is what he signed. It's legal. It's final." Daniel smiled faintly, his fingers brushing against the corner of his laptop as he prepared to pull the final piece from his arsenal. "Actually, the will you're holding is outdated. It's invalid. Graham executed a pour-over will that's been filed in accordance with the Bennett Legacy Trust. That will and the assets it encompasses have already been allocated." Veronica's face drained of color. She glanced at the papers in her hands, then back at Daniel, as if she were hoping for some kind of loophole, some way to argue that her version still held sway. But there was no way out. It was over. My father had been far more prepared than any of us had imagined. "Let me show you, though," Daniel said, his voice steady and clear. He slid the papers toward Veronica, but this time, it was clear that she wasn't in control anymore. The smirk she had worn earlier was gone, replaced by a mask of frustration and panic. She flipped through the papers quickly, searching for something, anything, that could change the course of the conversation. But Daniel was already ahead of her. "Your father knew exactly what you would do, Veronica," Daniel said, his voice quiet but filled with an undeniable certainty. He knew that, given the opportunity, you would try to contest his wishes. That's why he put safeguards in place. I stared at Daniel, trying to wrap my mind around what he was saying. My father had known everything, had anticipated everything. From the moment Veronica had entered our lives, he had been preparing for this day. He had known that she would stop at nothing to take everything from me, and yet, he had made sure I would be protected. Daniel pulled out a new set of documents, laying them down on the table with a calm precision. "This," he said, "is what your father actually intended." He slid the papers toward me, his gaze softening as he met my eyes. I could see the weight of his words in that moment. This wasn't just about money or assets. It was about justice. It was about a father's love for his daughter. "Graham executed a trust," Daniel continued, his voice steady as he walked us through the details. "The Bennett Legacy Trust, executed alongside the pour-over will. This trust is where the majority of his assets have been placed. And you, Nora, are the primary beneficiary." I felt the weight of those words settle over me like a cloak. It was as if the air had shifted, the tension in the room evaporating in an instant. The trust was the key. The trust was the thing that would protect me, that would ensure Veronica's schemes were finally exposed. "Graham knew what he was doing, Daniel continued, his voice calm and methodical. "He knew you would be the one to fight for what was rightfully yours. But he also knew that Veronica wouldn't stop. She would do everything in her power to try to seize control, to undermine you and the trust that your father placed in you." Veronica, who had been sitting silently, now looked like a cornered animal. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her fingers clenching around the papers as if she could will them into something else. "This is ridiculous," she spat, her voice full of venom. "I'm not going to just sit here and let you accuse me of—" "You don't have a choice, Veronica," Daniel interrupted, his voice unwavering. "You're not just fighting Nora's claim to the estate. You're fighting the trust. And the trust has something you can't overcome." I leaned forward, my heart racing as I absorbed what Daniel was saying. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Daniel smiled faintly, a knowing look in his eyes. "Your father knew that, if anything, Veronica's greed would be her undoing. That's why he included a no contest clause in the trust. If anyone contests the terms of the trust, they forfeit their share entirely." Veronica's eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing her face as the full weight of Daniel's words hit her. The no contest clause was a masterstroke. It wasn't just about denying Veronica access to the estate. It was about making sure she couldn't take anything away from me, couldn't make a move without suffering the consequences. But that wasn't all. Daniel's voice grew even more serious as he continued. "Your father also included something he called a dead man's switch. If anyone contests the trust, a collection of evidence that Graham had gathered over the years will be released." I could feel my breath catch in my chest as I processed the gravity of what Daniel was saying. The dead man's switch wasn't just a safeguard, it was a bomb waiting to go off. A last resort that would expose everything Veronica had done, everything she had hidden, all the lies, all the manipulation, all the abuse. He had Gregory Barnes, a former FBI agent, working with him. Daniel continued. Gregory gathered evidence, emails, documents, recordings, anything that could prove the extent of Veronica's actions. If she tries to challenge the trust, all of it will be made public. Veronica's face turned pale, her grip on the papers tightening as she realized the depth of her situation. She had thought she had won. She had thought she could control the narrative, twist the truth in her favor. But she hadn't counted on my father's foresight. She hadn't counted on him planning for this moment years in advance. Daniel's voice softened as he continued. This wasn't just about securing assets. Veronica. It was about ensuring Nora's safety, her peace of mind. Graham wanted to make sure that you couldn't hurt her again, and he knew that if it came to this, you would fight, but he also knew you would lose. Veronica's eyes flickered between the papers, the evidence, and Daniel, her mind clearly racing. She was trying to find a way out, trying to figure out how to salvage anything from this catastrophe, but it was too late. The truth was out, she had been caught, and there was no way to spin it. I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me as I realized the full extent of my father's planning. He had loved me enough to prepare for this, to ensure that even in death, he could protect me. He had known the risks, he had known what I was up against, and he had laid out the perfect strategy to make sure I could take back what was mine. Daniel turned his gaze toward me, his voice soft but filled with certainty. You've won, Nora. Your father's plan has been executed perfectly. Veronica's contest is futile. She has no ground to stand on. I looked at the documents in front of me, the weight of them now settling in my hands. I had always known my father was a man of strategy, a man who played the long game. But this was something else. This was love. This was protection. This was a father's final gift to his daughter. I looked at Veronica one last time. Her defeat was written on her face, the cracks in her facade widening with each passing moment. She had underestimated my father. She had underestimated me. It's over, Veronica, I said, my voice steady, a calm rising within me that I hadn't felt in years. She didn't respond, but I didn't need her to. The truth had won, my father had won, and now it was time for me to step into the life he had secured for me. Daniel's voice broke the silence once more. Nora, you're the beneficiary of everything. The trust is yours, the estate is yours, your future is yours. And for the first time, I felt like I could breathe. The past 15 years of manipulation, isolation, and fear had led to this moment. My father had spent his last years building a fortress around me, protecting me from a woman who would have stolen everything. And now, I was free to take what was rightfully mine, free to build my future without fear. Veronica had lost, and I had won. The room had fallen into a tense, suffocating silence, the kind that only comes when everything is on the verge of shattering. Veronica's plan, the one she'd spent years orchestrating, was crumbling right in front of her eyes, and she could feel it. I could see the panic starting to creep into her expression, a flicker of vulnerability that she wasn't able to hide. Her composure, her carefully constructed mask was starting to crack, and I could almost feel the weight of her realization. It was over. She had lost. Daniel Whitaker, calm and composed as ever, was relentless. He didn't let up for a second. He knew what he had, and he knew exactly how to play his hand. He sat at the head of the table, fingers steepled, watching Veronica with an almost clinical detachment as he laid out every piece of the puzzle. Piece by piece, he dismantled her defense, exposing the lies, the manipulations, the scheming she had spent so long perfecting. "Veronica," Daniel began, his voice cool, almost matter of fact. "This isn't going to work. You're fighting a losing battle." She didn't respond immediately, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she clutched the edges of the papers in front of her like a lifeline. It was a gesture that had once symbolized control, but now it was the last attempt to hold on to something, anything that might give her a way out. But she knew, deep down, that there was no escape. The evidence was too damning. Daniel didn't waste time. He went straight for the jugular. "Let's talk about the recordings. Veronica," he said, his eyes meeting hers with an unsettling calmness. "You were careful, weren't you? You thought you could control the narrative, but the truth is Graham had been documenting everything." I saw Veronica stiffen, her fingers tightening around the papers. She had known about some of the recordings, but she had never anticipated the sheer scale of the evidence Graham had gathered. She had thought that, by silencing him, by controlling every aspect of his life, she could rewrite the story. But my father had been smarter than that. He had seen through her long before any of this had begun. Daniel didn't give her a moment to recover. He was methodical, laying out each piece of evidence like a chess master moving his pieces across the board. "Let's start with the phone calls," he said, his voice steady. "You instructed the household staff to block Graham's calls from Nora. Do you remember that?" Veronica's face paled slightly, but she didn't speak. She didn't have to. Daniel had already anticipated her next move. "We have recorded conversations with Maria the housekeeper, who confirmed that you told her to tell Nora that Graham was unavailable whenever she called. We have the phone records showing how the calls were screened, and we have sworn affidavits from James the driver, who corroborated that you specifically instructed him to report Nora's visits so that you could ensure Graham was always indisposed." Daniel's voice never wavered, but I could see the effect his words were having on Veronica. She had been so sure that her manipulation would remain hidden, so sure that her power over my father and over me would go unquestioned. But now, the truth was coming out, piece by piece. Veronica's breath hitched slightly, and I saw the anger starting to bubble beneath the surface. She opened her mouth to speak, but Daniel cut her off with a raised hand. "You thought you had control, Veronica," he said, his tone unflinching. "You thought you could isolate Graham, make Nora appear negligent, make her seem like the one who abandoned him. But your plan is unraveling. You've been caught." Veronica's face twisted, the calm mask she had so carefully maintained beginning to slip. I could see the frustration building in her eyes, the realization dawning that she was losing. For the first time in years, I saw her as she truly was, vulnerable, exposed, desperate. It was a side of her I had never allowed myself to acknowledge, but in that moment, it was undeniable. "You didn't think it would come to this, did you?" Daniel continued, his voice cold. That Graham would leave behind a record of everything you did. He anticipated your every move. He knew exactly how far you would go to control him, to control the narrative, and he documented it all. Veronica's hands were shaking now, her grip on the papers loosening. She could no longer maintain the illusion of control. The walls she had built around herself were crumbling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. But that's not all, Daniel said, leaning forward slightly. Graham went even further. He hired a private investigator, Gregory Barnes, to follow you, to document your actions. We have footage of you meeting with Joseph Mercer, a disgraced accountant. We have evidence of you trying to create financial irregularities in the Bennett Development Group. You were attempting to set Graham up for a competency hearing, weren't you? Daniel's eyes never left hers. You were trying to take over the company, trying to force a conservatorship. I watched as Veronica's face flushed, her lips trembling as she fought to maintain composure. She had been so sure, so confident that she could manipulate the situation in her favor, but now, the full extent of her betrayal was on display for everyone to see. You were trying to build a case, Daniel continued, and you didn't care who you hurt in the process. You thought you could manipulate Graham's illness, make him seem mentally incompetent so you could take control of everything. But Graham saw through it all, so he knew what you were doing. He knew how far you would go to destroy him, to destroy Nora, and he made sure to protect her. Veronica's expression flickered, a mixture of disbelief and fury. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. For the first time, she was speechless. The evidence was too overwhelming, the weight of it too much to bear. She had no defense left. And then Daniel revealed the final piece. Graham had one last card to play, Daniel said softly, his voice carrying a weight that felt like finality. He knew that if it came down to this, if you challenged his will, if you tried to contest the trust, there was one last thing he could do to ensure you never hurt Nora again. Veronica's eyes widened as she slowly turned to Daniel, her breath quickening. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice cracking. What could he possibly have done? Her face was a mixture of fear and anger, but the fear was winning. She knew, deep down, that the game was over. Daniel smiled, the expression subtle but knowing. Graham had a contingency plan. He set up a dead man switch, a collection of evidence, both physical and digital, that would be released if anyone contested the will. He paused, allowing the words to sink in. If you tried to challenge the trust, all of it would become public. The recordings, the documents, the financial records, everything. Veronica's face went pale, her body going rigid as the full weight of what Daniel had said sank in. She could see it now, the trap she had walked right into. She had thought she could manipulate the system, thought she could control the narrative, but she had miscalculated. My father had been 10 steps ahead of her, and now she was caught in her own web. Graham made sure you couldn't win, Veronica, Daniel said, his voice gentle but firm. He made sure that no matter how far you went, no matter what you did, you couldn't take away his legacy. You couldn't take away Nora's future. I could see Veronica's hands trembling as she clutched the papers in front of her, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. She opened her mouth to speak, but her voice cracked, the words choking her. She had been beaten, not by me, not by Daniel, but by her own arrogance. Her manipulation had worked for so long, but now it was falling apart in real time, piece by piece. I... Veronica stammered, her voice faltering. You can't do this." Her words were weak, desperate, and for the first time, I felt a sense of satisfaction. It wasn't revenge. It was Gustus. Daniel didn't allow her to finish. He simply nodded to the papers on the table, the documents that had sealed her fate. It's done. Veronica, you've lost. Your contest is futile. The room was silent as the weight of the situation settled in. Veronica, the woman who had tried to control everything, who had tried to erase me from my father's life, was now the one who was powerless. The walls she had built around herself were crumbling, and there was nothing left to protect her. I watched as Veronica's shoulders slumped, her gaze dropping to the table in defeat. Her composure was gone, replaced by something raw, something human. I had never seen her this vulnerable before. I had never seen her break. "You're wrong," Veronica said quietly, her voice trembling. I didn't mean to hurt anyone." Her words were barely a whisper, as if she was trying to convince herself as much as anyone else. She looked up at me, her eyes full of something regret, perhaps, or maybe fear. But it didn't matter. It was too late. She had done enough. She had destroyed everything she had touched. "No, Veronica," I said, my voice steady. "You did mean to hurt us. You did it for yourself. You didn't care who you trampled along the way." She didn't respond. She couldn't. The truth had won, and her manipulation had failed. Daniel stood up, closing his laptop with a deliberate click. "It's over, Veronica. You've made your choice. The terms of the trust are non-negotiable." He glanced at me, his expression tightened slightly. "It's time to move forward." The room felt smaller now, the air lighter. Veronica sat in silence, her face pale, defeated. I could see the weight of the last 15 years pressing down on her. The realization that everything she had fought for was slipping through her fingers. The game was over. And I had won. Daniel turned to me, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Your father would have been proud. Nora, he always knew you had the strength to see this through." I nodded, my heart finally at peace. My father had played the long game, and now the end game had come. Veronica had lost, and I had everything my father had worked so hard to protect. As Veronica gathered her things and left the room, I stood there, knowing that this was the moment my father had planned for. He had known that, in the end, justice would prevail. He had known that I would emerge stronger, and now it was time for me to take back what was mine. As the dust settled and the last of Veronica's influence faded from the room, I sat there for a moment, alone with my thoughts. My father had done the impossible. He had orchestrated a plan so intricate, so perfect, that even in death, he was able to protect me from the chaos Veronica had brought into our lives. It wasn't just about the estate or the company or even the house on Willow Crest. It was about love, the kind of love that doesn't ask for anything in return, the kind that protects and shields, even when you're no longer here to do it yourself. I realized as the weight of everything sank in that my father had never stopped loving me, not for a single moment, not even when I thought I was alone. He had fought for me, even when I didn't know it. Every move, every decision, every strategy he had put in place was a testament to his love, his care, his unwavering desire to ensure that I could live the life he had always hoped for me. He had given me something no one could ever take away: freedom. Freedom from the control, the manipulation, and the fear that Veronica had built around us for so long. It's funny, isn't it? How we think we're always fighting battles on our own. But sometimes, the greatest protection comes in the quietest ways, the moments we don't even realize are happening. The plan he had put in motion years ago had been nothing short of genius. He had known what was coming. He had seen it all before it even happened. And now, as I stood on the other side of it, I realized something even deeper. patience, strategy, timing. My father had known that the best way to confront injustice was not with immediate force, but with careful planning, with patience, and with a quiet, steady hand that guided everything toward the right conclusion. It was a lesson that went far beyond money or inheritance. It was a lesson in love, in protecting what matters, and in never, ever giving up on the ones you love. As I looked around the conference room one last time, I felt a weight lift from my chest. The battle had been long, but the war was over, and I had won. Not because of the estate, or the money, or the things Veronica had tried to steal, but because I had my father's love, his wisdom, and his legacy. And that was something no one could ever take from me. I'm grateful for what he left behind, for the lessons, for the protection, for the love that still surrounds me even in his absence. It's a reminder that sometimes the most powerful force in the world is love. And the most lasting victory is the one that doesn't just win for today, but sets you up for a future that's stronger, wiser, and bright. If you've enjoyed this story and it's moved you as much as it has me, don't forget to like and subscribe. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what resonated with you the most. And if you believe in the power of patience, love, and strategy, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes, the right story at the right time can make all the difference. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the biggest victories are the ones you don't see coming. Take care, and I'll see you next time.